today with Glenn Zahn. And Glenn, could you just tell me a bit about your background?
Yes. Yes, my name is Glenn Zahn. I'm an investor, and I represent a company called Sirac Capital Management, and we're debt advisors. And I've been in this industry in the high yield and credit markets, distressed markets, for about 20, 25 years.
So companies that are in trouble,
Correct.
like Thames Water.
That's correct.
And you got in touch with us because you wanted to tell us your take on what's going on at Thames Water right now. Do you want to explain how you see the situation?
That's correct. And the reason why I reached out to you, because I understand the environmental concerns very much so. But there's another concern for the public interest that's important. It's just the vast expense of how much this is going to cost. And the most important thing is that it's going through a restructuring process called the UKRP, which is not an in-court process, but a court administrative process. And it's not going to solve any of Thames Water's operational problems. And it's important because the company is looking to borrow $3 billion in debt to fund its operations, or it's going to go basically become insolvent in March of this year. And the cost of that, people have been dangling a thing called a 9 3/4 coupon on that $3 billion of debt. But however, it's actually much more expensive than that, in the sense that there's a significant amount of incentivizing fees. There's also a thing called a make-whole provision that it's going to cost up to $156 million. So altogether, these incentivizing fees plus the interest, and what people are missing also is that thing called the advisory fees. That's the fees that the lawyers and financial advisors charge. That could put the cost of this well over $1 billion. So if you think about it, it's a $3 billion loan, and $1 billion of that is kind of netting, is going to fund that. So there's only $2 billion left for capital expenditures. Many people are saying that that these costs are going to be pre-funded in some sense. But at the end of the day, they need to be funded. It's a liability on the balance sheet. They need to be funded someday, somehow. And unfortunately, the bill payers, it backstops all the costs because they're the sole source of revenue.
So Thames Water, a company that serves 60 million people who don't have any choice about where they go for their water, because there's only one set of taps, only one set of infrastructure. And Thames Water was privatised in 1989, and since then, what we've seen is the company build up debt, build a debt mountain of around 19 billion now. And so this company is trying to get itself out of that situation and make more money in the process.
Right.
And we were saying, we were saying, households are going to pay for this. This is a bailout. It would be much more effective to bring this company into public ownership and start the debt in the process. And Glenn told us, actually, you're underestimating how much households are being ripped off here, because you're underestimating how much this group of people, these creditors, are going to get from the process, not just the interest, but the fees. And so you kind of spell that out for us.
Sure. And the most important thing to understand is, before we have this debate about nationalization, it's important to understand that the first step here is to place this in special administration. And the reason why special administration is important, and it looks like as this whole UKRP, or the restructuring plan process, is going forward, the ZAR, as is the acronym for special administration, is looking more likely, is because in the run-up to all these problems are not just the investors and company management, but it's the whole entire regulatory model is being questioned. And it was, as some experts say, that the regulator, Ofwat, was asleep at the wheel because they allowed the company to raise so much debt, and they didn't fulfill their fundamental responsibility by the Water Act of '91, and that's to protect the balance sheet. So they allowed all the debt to pile up until it was basically too late. And so the company needs to be restructured properly, not only from a financial perspective, but also a operational perspective. And through a special administration, it takes the oversight away from Ofwat and the government and puts it in the hands of the courts. And the special administrators, who are very seasoned insolvency practitioners, they have the duty to, especially in the ZAR, to do this all with the continuation of services to the customer and the customer's benefit in mind. That is their responsibility. They can basically do whatever they want or suggest whatever they want to operationally, it might be to break it up, to haircut the debt to a sufficient level, and at the end of the day, it's going to be a court approved. And that can set the stage where the government can decide, then Parliament can decide whether they should bring it into public ownership or not. But there is a kind of a thought that the Azar is too expensive, but so is the UKRP currently. And as I've said in the past, is that this process that could be sanctioned in 2 weeks does not solve the problems of Thames Water. It only plugs up the liquidity wall and prevents it from going insolvent in March. There's an entire other process called UKRP2, or Part 2 of the saga, that needs to happen to effect a recapitalization process, haircut the debt, etc. But there's no caveat attached to that, or any requirement for the company to fulfill any of its duties as far as pollutions are concerned, or any of the directives that OFLAT has. There's no regulatory requirements there. There's just oversight. So the chances are that we could be sitting here, if this is sanctioned several years from now, and the company just comes out of it, and it's going to be the same exact thing.
Exactly. And so what we're saying is, if the government used these special administration powers, but withdrew Thames Water's licence, they could cut the debt quite significantly. The Treasury's estimated, I think, like 40%, JP Morgan 55%. So you cut the debt, you take the creditors take a haircut,
Right.
and that way it's cheaper. And if the company's brought to public ownership, it can be refinanced more cheaply, which is obviously better, much better than a bailout, which we're all paying for and which won't work anyway.
Right.
I guess one thing that would be interesting to hear from you. You're in the investment, financial industry. Your specialty is distressed companies.
Right.
You're not a political campaigner.
Not at all.
But you
Apolitical.
got excited about this, and you got wound up about this, and you said, I need to say something about this. I'm actually going to reach out to campaigners. What made you want to do that in this case?
Because I think I'm one of my hobbies is I'm an outdoorsman, and I love the environment. I love going around, hiking, etc. But I felt that the campaigners were missing something, and I think that in their right, worrying about sewage spills, etc. That's very important. But the other part of the equation here is that the model that governs these companies, a regulatory model, it just doesn't work. And because we had this 10-year period of quantitative easing and cheap liquidity, a lot of these companies were allowed to lever up so much. And once the cost of capital and the interest rates rose, that is one of the reasons why Thames Water has gotten to the situation. We have Southern Water that is right on the doorstep. Water bills are going up 53% for the next regulatory period there. And there's no concrete plan that there's actually things could get better. So Thames is the guinea pig. And if you don't get Thames right, you may not get the rest of the sector. And it could be that the taxpayer at the end of the day could be bailing this all out. And just back to one thing you were saying about costs, is keep in mind that the government could provide capital, a much cheaper capital. Let's just say if they even actually wanted to make some money off of this, and treasury gilts are below 5%, so they could charge an interest of 6%, not a 9.75% loan.
So this $3 billion loan, we were saying, well, look, this is an interest rate of 9.75%, nearly 10%,
right?
Which is obviously much higher than the government cost it would be if it was refinanced in the public sector. But what you said to us was actually, if you put it together with all the fees, the money that they're making is more like 20%.
Well, yeah, I think that's one thing people are missing, because they see that whopping 9.75% coupon. But as I said before, you need to incentivize bondholders to sign on to the plan and provide the liquidity.
Quite risky.
Exactly. So there's also a thing called a make-whole. That is, if it gives the option of the company to retire it earlier, and if they do retire the debt earlier, they have to pay a penalty called a make-whole. That's according to court documents, is $156 million. So altogether, if you put these all together, if you were the person who the primary backstop holder who owned the Class A debt, and then you also participated in putting money into it, you had an incentivizing fee, a backstop fee of 3.5%. You also have another fee called an OID. That's an initial discount. So in other words, I will lend the company $100, but I'm also only lending them $97 or £97, but I'm going to get 100 back. So there's my discount, initial discount. So you put all that together, and the potential IRRs, we call rate of return, can approach 20%. And that's a lot of money for a 1.5 year investment.
Yeah, totally. And so, and what do you think about the? So we've got two groups of creditors right now. Are you more on the side of? Do you think there's anything to be said for the second group of Class B creditors?
This is we've really never seen this before because it's a lot of unique, and this is going to set precedents not only in investing in that, but also in case law as far as the UK restructuring plan is concerned. Because number one, as I said, it's not being used to right size the balance sheet. That's why this was designed. It's a beautiful tool to use. Companies could go in and come out in 4 or 5 weeks, and they'd be right sized, and everything would be great. People were haircutted. It has this thing called the cram down provision that if you're a dissenter like the Class Bs and you're supposedly out of the money for evaluation purposes, then you could be squashed and your claim is extinguished. So it's a very useful tool. So I think most people thought coming in here that the Class A's were driving the process and it's going to get sanctioned quite easily. But there's a couple of things that are preventing that. Is that because this is not a clear-cut plan, and we're going to emerge haircutted and et cetera, and there's another recapitalization process, the Bs do have a substantial argument.
Yeah. But really, they're just trying to make money as well off the public as well.
Yeah. But another thing that I'm slightly worried about is I was reading the FT this morning, and there is an environmental group, I think it's called Windrush, that is trying to insert themselves in the process. And I think because the czar has the public interest in mind, that is absent here. And investors really need to understand that this is all about the court's discretion. They have discretion and they will use it. And it all depends on the judge. If he decides, for example, that the public interest, we don't know what the arguments are. They haven't submitted them yet. But if those are substantial and they carry weight, this could be he may refuse to sanction it because it doesn't have what some people would call the creditor in waiting, the consumer has their interest in mind.
Yeah. So Windrush against sewage pollution is now getting involved in this court process and saying to the judge that they are representing the public, those 16 million people, those households across the Thames Water region who aren't getting a say right now, and they're trying to get themselves into that conversation and into that legal process.
And I can imagine that a lot of lawyers, et cetera, restructuring professionals are probably scratching their head right now because we've never seen anything like that where a customer is actually involved in a restructuring process. You see the HMRC because they're the tax man for a claim, but the customer, it's kind of unique.
Quite unusual. So let's just switch and talk about the bigger picture. Because obviously, if we own it, we campaign to bring all water into public ownership. We think that's what should happen. What's your take on the different figures that have been bandied about around the costs of bringing water into public ownership?
I think it's not just the figures. I think I wrote an article about this that I sent to you, and I think the thing that bothered me the most is that I just found awkward was that there's a thing called the Social Market Foundation. They wrote a report in 2018. It's been circulated by many experts and commented on, and they have grossly overestimated the cost of nationalization, like into the triple digits or tied triple digits, and this was ironically used by Steve Reed, who's the head of DEFRA and Secretary of State, and the rest of the government as a means of saying that nationalization was too expensive. And it is my understanding that nationalization, all that needs to be done is Parliament needs to have a simple majority. They need to approve the nationalization of Thames Water, and then the legal ramification or liability there is that they need to fund on the book value of the equity, not the market value.
Which is more like 15 billion, or at least it was a few years
right.
ago.
And the debt could also be taken out of book value, or I think it possibly could be let in, or it could actually be replaced by government debt at a cheaper 6%, as we were saying. But the key thing is that nationalization is not as expensive as people thinks it is.
Yeah, and so the government keeps repeating this figure of 100 billion. Actually, here we have a finance industry expert saying that's not true. It's more like the book value, which would be around 15 billion.
Right.
And so, yeah, so.
But I think a key thing to understand too is that in this thing for nationalization is that a lot of people say nationalization isn't bad, and I'm not saying it's the best thing and the greatest thing because I really don't know much about that. But people understand is that nationalization, as we know it, was from the 1970s, et cetera, and it was a different animal, a different period of time. One of the key problems, as you've seen, like someone like Sir Dieter Helm, who's an industry expert, says, is that there's a significant amount of operational problems. He even says that management has no idea where the spills are, and a guy named Peter Habman, and that's a one-man show, mapped it all out, is that they are living in the analog world, and the company needs to be operationally restructured. And if it is done properly and is brought up to the same performance level as many other companies in the civilized world, then this company, and if it could be nationalized as long as there's proper oversight.
And do you think what they're actually scared of is that the city is going to take fright and take flight and disappear out of the country? And do you think that's true?
What city? You mean investors?
Yeah, like investors, finance capital. Do you think that they're going to be horrified if Thames Water is brought into public ownership?
No, I don't think so because I think it's first because it's a water company. And like I said, water companies are very capital intensive, so that's why it doesn't work in the current regulatory model. And that's why the majority of the civilized world owns them. But I think investors have already seen the writing on the wall in the sense that if you look back at news articles, et cetera, and you see that they had their investor conference, the government, a month before the budget was released. I think investors are very skeptical of the UK, not because they're going to nationalize. It's just that the cost of capital has gone up. The returns aren't here. For example, in the final determination, the cost of equity on an inflation-adjusted basis was 5%. That's not a lot for an equity holder in the UK, given all the risks, where you can get substantially better returns elsewhere. So I think the government's kidding themselves if they're afraid to do this, and they're going to keep. I understand they need to fund their green projects, et cetera, but I don't think your infrastructure investors would be scared just because of nationalization.
Great. Thank you so much, Glenn. Really interesting
Sure.
to you.
Nice to talk to you too.
So interesting to get your perspective and to have somebody from your world talking to us about this.
Okay.
So thank you, and we'll talk to you again soon. We'll see you
Great.
in the.
Thank you.